Good morning, my creative friends. This is Painting in Your PJs with Minette, and I am Dr. Minette Riordan. And during Painting in Your PJs, we gather live to create, connect, and talk about all things life, love, and art. And this month, I'm really focusing on archetypes, imagery, symbolism, how they add meaning to our art, and how they show up in our art in different ways. And I love talking about symbols, so this week I'm really focusing on symbols. And if you're joining me live, I'm not sure my microphone is working, so if you can pop in and let me know that you can hear me. Somebody will pop in and let me know if they can hear me here at some point. It looks like it's working, but sometimes it's a little hard to tell. So thank you for being here. And this month I am working in a handmade journal. There is a link in the description of the video to a $10 video on how to create a simple no-sew journal using manila folders. Oh, yay. Thank you, Marion. Good morning. Good morning. And so I am starting to work in this journal this month and fill it up. This was a sample journal I created for another program. And first we talk about good morning. Thank you guys. Appreciate you both as always for being here. So the first symbol we talked about was the arrow. Yesterday we looked at the symbol of the Hamsa. And today we're going to be looking at the symbol of the lotus flower. And I wanted to share a fun, simple cheat, if you will, or a great way to practice and get better at drawing. There is a wonderful website called easydrawingguides.com, and especially when I'm looking to just capture outlines or simple things or to practice my drawing and get better drawing, it's a great tool for step-by-step drawing practice. And what I love about this, even though this is often sort of directed towards children, that when we're starting out in our own creative journeys, drawing is one of the hardest things to capture. And as adults, it can be really challenging to take ourselves back to beginner's mind. And beginner's mind means that we have to practice. And so I will often pick a theme and have a journal sitting by the sofa in the evenings and do some practice drawing from easy drawing guides of different animals. And this is one they have for how to draw a lotus flower. It's deceptively simple to draw this shape, and so I really was appreciative when I found this particular guide. I've already done some journaling and added some gesso to the top of my journal page this morning. I'm going to draw the lotus right on top of there, and then we'll see how we go along today. But before I dive into the sample drawing of the lotus, I wanted to share a little bit about the lotus flower symbolism. And one of my favorite quotes is the one by Thich Nhat Hanh that says, "Most people are afraid of suffering, but suffering is a kind of mud to help the lotus flower of happiness grow. There can be no lotus flower without the mud." And so much of the lotus flower symbolism is about that separating ourselves from the murk into the clarity of the light. So it represents spiritual enlightenment, detachment from materialism. It also represents resurrections and new beginnings, which is, I think, why I was really sort of leaning towards this right here at the beginning of the year. Every day the lotus flower comes up into the sun and blooms, and then as the sun recedes, it closes up again. And so it was revered by the Egyptians and connected with the Egyptian god Ra because it tended to follow the sun. And also that idea of resurrection and new beginnings, it was connected to funerals and death, but also to fertility and to healthy birth because of the opening of the lotus. So it's literally thousands and thousands of years of cultural traditions and spiritual traditions around the world have revered the lotus. But the other thing about the lotus, in addition to the symbolism, it's just an exquisitely beautiful flower, an exquisitely beautiful flower. So I am going to create a page with the lotus and the Thich Nhat Thich Nhat Hanh quote, "No mud, no lotus." If you're not familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, he was a revered Buddhist monk, worth looking up some of his writings and some of his story and some of his history. Sadly, he is no longer with us, but he was truly an amazing man, spiritual teacher, and spiritual leader in the Buddhist tradition. All right, so I'm just going to follow this step-by-step guide here. And I'm putting my lotus kind of towards that top of the page. I want it to be pretty big and fill up a lot of that page. So we're just starting with this kind of oval shape, noticing on the drawing that the base of the petal is a little rounder than the top. Let's go over here this way. And then we're just going to start adding the petals. And one of the things that I like to notice is, where do those petals line up? So giving yourselves some guidelines, right? Are those petals even? What are they even with? And it can help you just notice how to eyeball things by just noticing some of that alignment in the different parts of the petals. So we can even draw some of those guidelines, knowing that we're going to paint it over or we can erase it later. The lotus also makes a wonderful string for adding Zentangle patterns if you're a fan of Zentangle. So I'm going to start this one at about that same point there. And I don't need the petals to be perfect. If you were to look at an actual lotus, it's easy to make them sort of very stylized, but traditionally when you look at the flowers of a petal, they're not all the same. So it can be a little bit deceptive to think that all the petals need to be exactly the same, which is true in life as well. No 2 days are alike, no 2 people are alike. If each of us were a lotus blooming, we would all have variations and difference. And this was always the one that felt the trickiest to draw, was this one sort of coming out from the center here. So it's foreshortened, right? It's much smaller than some of the other petals. And I might even round this a little bit. And I'm just continuing to go around following my guide here and drawing these petals. And you notice that the complete flower isn't round, it's actually an oval shape. So sometimes our mistake is we're trying to make things look round, but notice that it's actually an oval shape. And anything I don't like can get corrected later or as I paint. But as you know by now, I am not a perfectionist. And I'm enjoying this week working on these sort of bigger versions of these symbols and having a soul focus. Sometimes, symbols appear in my work and there may be just an aspect of a page, but as we give our attention and interest to these symbols, honoring them by just creating an entire page in my visual journal about that symbol is a way to really be with the meaning and energy of that. All right, did I get all the petals in there? They have a lot of petals. I'm kind of wanting to maybe squeeze one more in here, but I want it to go behind, I think. So again, taking some creative license. And then we notice that the lotus blooms from a huge oval leaf that I would call a lily pad. The lotus is very similar to the lily. My husband's family has cottages on the coast of Nova Scotia where there are many beautiful brackish ponds near the shoreline, and they are often, when we're there in the summers, full of blooming lilies. So I'm very fond of them. And I think it's only ever been a few times that I've actually seen a lotus blooming. There was a beautiful garden when we lived in the Dallas, Texas area, a beautiful botanical garden that had lilies in their Zen garden area. Maybe I'm going to bring that back there a little bit. So that leaf is looking a little out of balance there on the page, so I'm going to actually come in maybe and add another one down here to create a little more balance on my page. Still not loving this. So this is the fussy part, right? Where we're just taking our time, getting things how we want them. I love how the lily turned out. It feels complete. But this part of the leaf is much longer over here than I think I was giving it credit for. Okay, that's better, sort of filling that page a little bit. And then remembering that we're often working in threes in our designs and patterns. So I might have a piece of a leaf up here as well. So creating a little symmetry in my design. Okay, so let me get rid of some of those extra guidelines in there. And now I get to start making some decisions about where I want to go with this. Do I want to keep the painting very simple and focused on the lotus? Do I want to do like I did with the Hamsa yesterday and add patterns and decorations, which I'm having a lot of fun with right now in my artwork, which means keeping patterns and designs really simple. So I think I'm going to start with the background. I'm going to come in with some of this cobalt blue and see what kind of trouble we can get up to. How's everybody doing? Are you guys drawing your lotuses over there? So if you're just joining us, welcome, good morning. Love for you to say hello. I want to keep paint off of my pages underneath. And it's interesting, I am working on manila folders, recycled, just old manila folders. My father-in-law does bookkeeping and some accounting, and so he often has stacks of old manila folders around, so I usually grab a stash when I'm up visiting. Actually, it's a great time of year to see if he has any old ones from last year that he's recycled. And they're an interesting, very sort of flat surface, but it's noticing how the paint lands on them over the top of the gesso. It's not super smooth, so if I want this to be a little more solid on there, I might end up needing to add a couple of coats, but we'll see what's the look and the effect that I want. Remembering I'm covering up all the writing that I did underneath. The writing and the journaling as part of the visual journaling experience is for me to just take some time to put some thoughtfulness into what I'm creating. Some intention and meaning. It doesn't need to be about anybody else seeing those words. If I write something that I want to keep track of, then I would just simply snap a picture of that writing. So so that I would have that somewhere later. All right, that background's looking pretty good there. Good morning, Kay. Great to see you. We're working with the symbol of the lotus flower this morning, which is often about spiritual enlightenment, separating ourselves from the murky environment around us, reaching for the light. I can't remember how many thousands and thousands of years the symbol of the lotus flower goes back in time, but it is definitely one of the most ancient and revered symbols in various Eastern cultural and spiritual traditions, all the way back to the time of the Egyptians. All right. Coming together. So this is going to be one of those ones that's not super complicated, and I think that's what I'm enjoying about the different working with the symbols and simple images. Some of my visual journaling pages, there's lots of layers and complexity, and there's something to be said for simplicity. Something to be said for simplicity. All right. I'm looking for some, this is not going to be the right color green, but it's going to get our first layer of green down there. I think the green I want is over on my other table. But let's just get a little bit of green on here. I'm not worrying about edges. I will come back and neaten everything up with my Posca markers, and some nice outlines and patterns around these is one of the things that I love about the Poscas. This one is a fairly transparent color. We talked a little bit before about just paying attention to your paints. A little spot of green right there. I need a smaller brush is what I need. And noticing the amount of transparency or opacity in a particular color. So you can see my blue is much more opaque and this green is much more transparent, which is fine, which means I might need either a couple of layers, or sometimes I want that transparency. I want to be able to see the layers that are underneath. Anyone else a fan of the lotus flower like I am? Find yourself being drawn? Kay, was it you that said you found yourself being drawn to lotus symbolism lately? And I tend to think of the lotus as a pink flower, although in different cultures you can find it in different gardens in different parts of the world, different colors. Apparently in Egypt they tended to be more blue and white. There are some that are more yellow, but for me, traditionally, the lotus tends to be a pink flower. And today I'm just using paint right out of the tube. I am not worrying too much about mixing my own colors. I'm digging around for something pink in here. Let's see, this is a Dilutions. These are nice little paints. Good morning, Barbara. Great to see you here this morning. This is Pink Flamingo. Pink Flamingo. So if you're just joining us, thank you for being here. Delighted to have you here, joining in Painting in Your PJs live with me, Dr. Minette Riordan. And this month we are talking about archetypes and symbols. This week I'm looking specifically at different archetypal symbols that tend to show up around the world in different cultures and in art. Lotus flowers are popular for tattoos, but we see them used on all kinds of things. Yesterday we looked at the Hamsa, which is all about protection. On Monday I shared that the arrow is my symbol of the year. I love creating a symbol of the year to guide me and that connects with my word or phrase. Or as my friend Shannon says, my theme of the year. I like the idea of having a theme of the year. I love that, Kay, that the lotus was something that helped guide you in a decision. I love that. I was at a painting retreat year before last, an intuitive painting retreat, and we were painting on these giant pieces of paper. It was an amazing process. And I also kept painting the lotus flower. I think it was a moment in time where it felt like things were very muddy and murky in my life, and especially in my business, and I was really looking for those answers and decisions in the way to rise above the mud that I was finding myself in. Excuse me. And I can just still very faintly see, you can't see it on the screen that well, some of the words behind there. I do think I want to get a small brush and just get into some of these nooks and crannies with my blue. Lotus is also fun to paint with watercolor. You can really get some beautiful effects painting the lotus itself with watercolor. Even though I'm probably going to cover some of that up, it just makes me feel better to smooth out some of those lines. Neaten up my shapes a little bit. And I think I am, because that's what I'm having fun with this week, is to stick with adding patterns and designs to this, like I did with the Hamsa yesterday. So I'm going to hit this with my dryer. I'll be right back, and I'm going to grab my Posca. Just a reminder when you're working with paint markers to make sure that your surface is really dry. Otherwise you will ruin the tip of your paint markers. And I have used so many of my blacks and whites that I'm coming to the end of a lot of them. So let me dig around and see if I have another fine one in here. Otherwise we're going to have to go with our fat one like we did yesterday. Okay, we're going to stick with this big fat one, which just creates a different look, right? So if I'm working with these bigger bullet tips, it just creates a different look. But already just starting to add these outlines to our lotus creates something a little more graphic and stylized, which is how I like to draw anyway. And already it's covering up the pencil marks and some of the imperfections of the outlines. And I'm going to do my leaves as well. And I'm going to leave the background very simple and plain and just add pattern to my flower and my leaves. And now I have to think about where I want to go with the designs and the patterns. So you guys always get to see me in my thinking process and sort of not really knowing where I'm going or how I want to approach this. So these are such interesting leaves when you look at the veins of them. They grow in a fairly sort of unique way. So maybe I'm just going to add some leaf-like patterns to these. I thought my paint was dry there. Oh, it's a piece of tape is underneath there. And they don't all have to be the same. And it goes very fast because I'm drawing with this super chunky black marker. If you're drawing with something finer, your lines will be much more detailed. And I will come back in with some other colors and add more pattern and decoration to these, keeping my patterns simple. And I love creating what in Zentangle we would call inner auras. I'm just paralleling those outside lines to just create a little extra space in my pattern. Just creates a little bit, again, that more stylized look. I think tomorrow, oh, and Marion, thank you so much for sending me the email yesterday with the link to the TED Talk. I haven't had a chance to watch it and I have not seen that one, so thank you for sending that over. I'm looking forward to watching that. But I'm not sure what symbol to tackle for our 4th day tomorrow. I'm thinking maybe the cross. Also feeling like flags are really interesting symbols, and it might be fun to play with a flag and creating our own personal flag. It's one of those symbols that throughout time people have been using banners and flags as forms of identification, but also as forms of rallying people. So again, just putting some really simple patterns in here will continue to add color and decoration to this. If you're here watching live, say hello. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the lotus flower today as a symbol of spiritual enlightenment and also about just rising above the mud, the chaos. I also love that it represents being very grounded. It's interesting that the lotus actually grows right at the very edge of its leaf from here, right? From the edge of the leaf, and the roots are in the leaves, and the leaves also rise to the surface. They're such beautiful flowers. I think that's partially probably part of their popularity. Muka is my mac and cheese tangle. It's one of those ones that I tend to include in just about everything that I create. They're so fun to draw. But I'm doing sort of more floral doodles inside the petals instead of traditional Zentangle patterns, mostly because I'm working with this big fat marker, and it makes it challenging to draw anything too detailed. More or less mirroring those patterns on either side of the lotus, like we talked about yesterday. It's one of the ways to just create symmetry and have the eye flow and feel like there's balance in the design when we're repeating patterns and looking at how things are balanced. From a color perspective, our pink and green are opposite colors on the color wheel, pink representing red. And so we have this lime green and this sort of bright pink make a nice contrast with each other, as well, with a very sort of neutral blue in the background. So the color choices also contribute to the piece overall. I also love orbs, circles, dots. And adding a simple grid in here, just some variation. I have a lot of sort of botanical elements in my drawings, but what happens then if I come in and maybe just add a grid design? And I'm almost feeling like I don't want to add any patterns to this leaf. I'm not sure, so I'm going to leave that for a minute and start to just simply add some color. And I love, again, it feels very almost childlike and simple. And also because of the simplicity, and I'm working in, on this manila folder material, I'm not attached at all to the design or the page. It's more about being in the experience, the playfulness, the connection to the lotus, letting go of any need for perfection, quieting my inner critic that says that I always have to create something really unique and special and magical for the people who are watching. And that's not my intention. My intention is to be here in my personal practice, connected to the page through writing and through art, and letting whatever comes come. And that's often the most challenging part of our own personal creative practice, is getting out of our own way, allowing ourselves to sit with the discomfort of imperfection, it's amazing how just with black and white we can create something that's really quite beautiful and stunning. And I'm wondering if I even want to add other colors, so we'll see what happens here. This is a very fine point white. This is the 0.7 millimeter, which is allowing me to create a much finer design and pattern elements. Remembering to turn my page, 1, to make it easier to draw, but 2, to make sure I'm not dragging my hand through those wet patterns, which I am very fond of doing. I make that mistake all the time, and then notice how I have managed to smear half the patterns that I drew. Depends on the paper, Marion. That is a great question. If it's a nice heavyweight mixed media or watercolor paper, no. But if it's a thinner drawing or sketch paper, it can be very helpful to gesso it first, which will just make it less porous and take more of those wet materials better. So it depends, I would say, on the weight of your paper. The thing about gesso, so it adds integrity to the page, but it also adds texture. So if you like texture, it's great to start with some gesso. And you can always use clear gesso, or black gesso. You don't always have to use white gesso. In the journal that I was working in December, I was using a much lighter weight paper, and so I did end up gessoing all those pages or adding collage to just make them a little stiffer and tougher so they would take on more of the mixed media in the wet, especially if you're working, acrylics can be very dry, but if you tend to work wet and you want to add lots of layers and not have holes in your paper, then I would definitely suggest adding that layer of gesso. It's a great question. Anybody else have any random art questions that have been on your mind for a while? Always happy to answer questions. Hard to talk and do patterns at the same time. I tend to get caught up in the design and the mindfulness of that. Letting my cup of tea get cold. So again, simple colors, simple designs creates kind of a nice dramatic effect. It would be easy to go in here and add lots of color, but I don't think it needs it. I'm kind of really liking the simplicity here. It always looks so different looking at it on the screen. The colors aren't as vibrant, but I can also, it gives me some perspective and sort of backing away from my design. It can be really helpful to hold your work up, to step away from it, hold it at arm's length, look at it at arm's length, snap a picture with your phone, and look at it through the photograph. You start to see things that you don't notice when you're up close and personal. So I mentioned yesterday that coming up at the end of the month, I'm going to be doing a mythical makeover experience based on one of my all-time favorite books from my childhood, which was The Secret Garden. And so I watched an old version of the movie yesterday with Maggie Smith. I think it was from the 90s, maybe the early 90s, when Maggie Smith was just starting her career, and she's amazing, an amazing actress that I love. But I loved rewatching the movie and being reminded of the symbolism and why I love the story of it, and watching two very lonely and spoiled children just come to life, right? So much symbolism, and flowers are a big part of that symbolism. And in the secret garden, you know, in the winter, are things dead, or are they just lying fallow, waiting to come back to life again? So many beautiful metaphors. So the weekend of January 21st and 22nd, I'm going to be doing a mini retreat, and those of you that had signed up for the Radiant Retreat, you're going to be automatically included in that, and I'll be sending more information about that. I'm excited for this weekend for the second session of the Radiant Retreat as well. But as I was writing some of my emails yesterday to start talking about this, I was going back to thinking about the stories of both childhood and adulthood, and I was writing about the symbol of the arrow in particular. You're welcome, Kay. It's gonna include the journal making class that was already included. I've just expanded that a little bit to go from the journal making into this other experience. I'm sort of combining things together. But thinking about the arrow in recent years has become such a popular, the bow and arrow symbol. The movie Brave, the Disney movie Brave, which I love. Hi, sweetie. Can you come say hi? Georgia says good morning to everybody. The movie Brave with the character Merida, which is also a movie full of stories and strong symbols, the bear, the mother-daughter relationship, but Merida excels with the bow and arrow. Or a number of years ago, when the book series came out, The Hunger Games, and they made the movie with the heroine Katniss Everdeen, also bow and arrow, super popular symbols in these. So I started to think about how much of my love of using myth and archetypes and symbolic imagery started in childhood, and thinking back to the stories that I love to read all the way back to, I'll be dating myself here, to the Crystal Cave, and all the stories of King Arthur, and moving on to Marion Zimmer Bradley's Mist of Avalon, and then discovering fantasy fiction and anything about dragons, Sword of Shannara, Lord of the Rings, all those stories that really are all about the hero's journey. And I've been doing a lot of work the last couple of years. It's interesting. There's a wonderful book by Maureen Murdoch called The Heroine's Journey that was written, I think, like right at the late 80s, early 90s. And she was working with Joseph Campbell, and she asked him one time about where's the woman on the hero's journey, and he made some really inane comment about how, well, she's just there, but there was no suggestion that she was ever out on this quest of her own. And so she wrote this book in response to how women have our own very specific heroine's journey throughout our life, and she sees it not as sort of a linear quest, but as a more circular quest that we cycle throughout our lives, and we can be in, you know, different places of the journey at the same time. But similar to the hero's journey, there always seems to be that inciting incident that sets us onto the path of the quest, like in famous movies and famous books. You know, this is something that Joseph Campbell brought to attention, and there's some wonderful infographics about like Star Wars, Harry Potter, all the famous movies, and how they, sorry Georgia, are just the hero's quest, like all the way back to Homer's Odyssey. These are not new stories or story structure, but that I think in our modern world today that there needs to be some changes to that story, and what can we take from that to sort of support us in living today. And so I really loved Maureen Murdoch's version, and one of my mentors, Caracello, has a new sacred journey model as well that's less gendered and more about just the emotional stages of the journey, but they all start with a quest for something or an inciting incident that sets us on a path. And sometimes it can be as simple as connection to a symbol or a taking up of a new hobby. Oftentimes it can be death, divorce, loss of a job, being moved into a caregiving role. There's a lot of different things that become, for us, the inciting incident last year was my husband really needing to get out of a job that was making him miserable. Yes, love that. Goddesses in Every Woman, I was just looking through that this week. I really, at this stage, really love, if you haven't read The Goddesses in Older Women, is a great different reflection as well. So I'm thinking I'm going to keep these colors very simple and maybe add a color around the lotus to the background. We'll see. I'm also listening right now to Sharon Blackie, whose work I really love. Her book, If Women Rose Rooted, was a wonderful book. And she has a new book called A Haggitude, which is a book about, you know, the wisdom of older women also, and the ways they're treated, dismissed currently, and ways that they were honored and revered in other cultures and times. So just being in that conversation of, I turned 58 this month, you know, it's like, where am I on my own journey? I definitely don't feel like I'm in my crone years yet. But these are the types of themes and conversations that I'm often having in my own head. Zentangle was one of the things that really brought me back to my own art and creativity like 12 years ago. And it's the one practice, in addition to painting, that I've really kept over the years. Even though I love to experiment and try new things, I often come back to this practice, I think, because of the, one, I love the way it looks, but two, because of the mindful benefits of drawing these simple repetitive patterns, just like coloring mandalas or sacred circles, these simple practices that remind me to just slow down my breathing for a minute, get quiet. I find it to be a form of active meditation. I'm not very good at sitting meditation. So appreciating the simplicity of this. And thinking I'm going to write the quote in here rather than adding patterns to this leaf. But now I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, you know, maybe I do want some little pops of color. So what if I added just a little more pink to my lotus? Just for some variations in color that's a little hard to see, but it's just going to make some of these shapes and make that color. I want that lotus to really pop off the page. Right, I'm wondering what would happen if I just came in and added some other marks around the page. When we, think about a pool of water, it's rarely completely clear. There's often lots of things floating around on the surface of the water, seeds and grasses that have blown in. Just makes that page somehow feel a little bit more festive. And because I just love adding marks to the page. So again, just keeping things simple is one of my favorite ways to approach a page. They don't always have to be so layered and complex. And allowing ourselves to just zero in on a focal point can allow things to just really pop off the page. I'm going to come in here. Putting those words in there. And what am I going to, my big black one is too fat, so I may need to go find, we'll start with this one, but I may need to go find a bigger permanent marker. And I love this quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, so no mud, no lotus. And so often we want to go straight to that fullness of our blooming self. our spiritual self, our creative self. And it takes time for those seeds to be planted and germinate. So I'm definitely going to want to go find a thicker pen to finish this up. I want to make sure I honor the author of that. I kind of like the white. So let's see, will the white show? Probably not, because that pen is water soluble, but I'm going to go maybe find a different pen, maybe put black and then some white over the top of it. And it's funny, the colors don't show, but there's definitely a lot of that. And I'm thinking it needs, now that we've added some of these other patterns, maybe just a little touch of white in the background too, to just kind of pull all this together and brighten it up a little bit. Just with a few little crosses in there, little sparkles. And there we have a super, super simple page honoring the symbol of the lotus, no mud, no lotus. And so I will finish that up with some different black. Let's just see if we can make this work. So I like being able to walk away from a session with something finished, but that doesn't always happen. Either it needs to dry, or I don't have the supplies that I need. But I do love a finished project. Okay, that wasn't too bad. All right, there, now I can see the quote. No mud, no lotus. I could have centered that a little bit better, but you know what? Maybe we'll just make that an ellipsis instead of a period, and then it feels a little more centered, and it feels like curiosity as well. I don't have all the answers, but what I do know is if I stay connected to this idea that remembering that with every blooming flower, there needs to be some grounding, some rootedness, some water, and some mud, it can help me stay more connected to the truth of who I am in the moment, and both grounded and blooming. I like to say roots and wings. This allows us to be in that energy of roots and wings. As always, thank you, my friends, for joining me. This is Painting in Your PJs with Minette, and I will be back with our final symbol tomorrow, and it'll be a surprise because I'm not sure what that is yet. I have some thoughts. I want to go watch the TED Talk that Marion sent me, and we will finish up our week with something fun. So this week we've been exploring symbols and archetypes. We've looked at the arrow, we've looked at the lotus, and yesterday we created our Hamsa as just some of those symbols that are present. And you notice I'm working in different places in my journal. Not for any particular reason. When I'm teaching, I find it's easier to have a blank page so that neither you nor I am distracted by what's going on, but at some point I will go back and fill in these pages with other things as well. So this is the journal that I am working in throughout the month of January. It's a handmade journal made out of recycled manila folders, and it's going to get filled with archetypes, images, and symbols. We'll do one more symbol tomorrow, and then week 2 I'm going to be doing some work with animals. I love animal symbolism, and I'm open to suggestions if you have a favorite animal. I'm feeling elephant is definitely going to come along to play, and maybe some coyote magic as well. So no mud, no lotus. As always, thank you for joining me. I am so grateful you took the time to stop by and watch for a little while or the whole time and create along with me. This is Painting in Your PJs. We go live Mondays to Thursdays at 7 a.m. Mountain Time. I I will see you tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.